does he keep joining and leaving?
Where is it?
No clue.
Okay, is everyone in the draw pile? Everyone, all two
Yeah.
of you?
I'm inside the draw pile.
Okay. All right. We're gonna do, since you were here before, Daddy. So, we're gonna do the same thing that we did last time, which is basically the only difference is that I'm actually streaming it this time. So whoever's not here can actually watch. Yeah. Yes. So if you want to post an image on layer 1, then we can go. I can help you break it down into shapes or whatever, and show you like tips on how to draw the pose or draw the face or whatever, using the basic shapes.
Okay.
Now, if you don't have any images or anything like that, I can post something myself, and I can go through it. But I'd rather you guys, if it's something that you wanna draw, or if you want to like need help breaking something down, just throw it in there.
Did we?
Was that?
Did we do this?
Maybe I'm confused. Did I help you with the poses before with the women?
Oh, I know what you're talking about.
Yes. Yeah, that was you. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Something.
It was pretty much just you and Satin. So and Satin was doing his own thing. So.
Something I want broken down.
Yeah. If you wanna,
does it have to be a person?
No, it doesn't have to be a person.
Okay.
I'd rather it be photography, but that's okay. If you have a,
it's gonna be. I'll post it in Classroom.
Okay.
Since it's easier for me.
Interesting. Okay.
I would like to see how you go about drawing it.
Drawing that. Okay.
Mhm.
All right, we got a pose over here, and then we got these cookies. Hang on, let me put these cookies in here.
Bread.
Bread?
Mhm.
They look like cookies.
It's bread.
It's bread.
It's either from French or Paris or something like that, or Japan itself. It's called melon.
Oh, okay.
Oh, melon pan.
Yes, I've heard of that. Paste from file.
I was gonna buy one off eBay, not to change subject or anything, but then they were like not telling me the date when it was gonna come, and I was like, "Oops, excuse me." Burped off bananas.
All right, so let's start with. All right, so let's start with the figure there. Let's see if I can do this. Oops. All right, so layer 1, layer 2. What's that on? Oh, that's on layer 3. All right, fine. Layer 2 is for me. Layer 3 is for you guys. Okay. So, all right. Where's my cursor? Okay, here we go. So for the figure here, I'm gonna draw on layer 3 just because it's easier. Okay, so the major things I'm going to look at is the torso. So I always try to start with the torso. When you're drawing the body, I tend to start with the torso. I know a lot of people start with the head, but the torso is actually the biggest mass of the body, and the head is actually a appendage. Just like an arm or a leg or something like that. The head is not going to move the rest of the body. The head is going to go with the center mass, which is the torso. So I always figure that out first, figure out where that is, figure out the head, figure out where the shoulders are. This is an interesting pose because it's not quite completely in profile. So just figuring out where the hips.
Hi.
Yep.
Someone's talking in classroom asking if it's possible to use draw tile on
Oh, was there a Chromebook? Probably. I don't think it is actually.
No, no, it's not possible. I have a Chromebook myself.
Windows, Mac. I have to figure
what
out
the heck is it? Is it what is that third one?
Linux.
That's a computer?
It's an operating system.
What?
Yeah, like the Windows is an operating system, and Mac OS is an operating system, and Linux is also an operating system. It's an
I've
open
never heard,
source operating system.
I've never heard of Linux.
It's mainly used in one, it's mainly used by geeks, okay,
Oh,
and two, it's geeks, and it's more for like servers and stuff like that. Usually, servers and web servers and stuff like that for development and whatnot. But it's becoming more popular for basic everyday desktops as well. I've used it several times. It's actually not bad to use. It's free. It's open source. You can install tons of apps for it that are also free and open source. Yeah, but it's lesser known only because it's like not Windows and it's not Mac. So, you know.
okay.
So that's how I would break it down, just from a stickman figure aspect of it. So, again, if I was going to duplicate that, I'd start with the torso, figure out the neck and the head. Then I can figure out the where the hips will go, more like that. Probably, actually, it's more high. It's a little bit higher than that. Actually, hang on. Let me try this again. Like there, and then there. And again, when you're using references, don't be afraid to just draw right over top of them, just to kind of get the basic gist of it down. Because then you can always, you've kind of trained your hand at that point to see where all the shapes and lines are. So so then when you want to draw it freehand, you've got a little bit of muscle memory built up. And you'll be a little bit, closer to what you want to get. Neck. Then at that point, the thing that you want to make sure that you're doing when you're the thing that you want to do when you're working with a reference is making sure that you break down things into shapes and you're getting the proportions right. Once you have the proportions down, then that's really the hardest part, is making sure everything's the right size and shape for what you're doing. So, once you have the basic proportions down, you have the basic shapes down, that will allow you to at least then know how to draw all your details. So, like if I was going to draw the clothing, I can see, where the jacket goes and all the folds in the jacket, right there. There's a little bit of belly right there. I'm not really good at feet, so I'm still practicing that myself, but you get the idea. Um, then hair, and but the idea is that, you know, don't, you know, look at the reference as a series of shapes, you know, so you don't get overwhelmed, you know, by all the details, you know, which is usually what happens to people. They get overwhelmed by all the details and they don't know where to start. As far as the bread, let me move this out of the way. Come here, you. Come over here. Thank you. Okay, so again, the bread. There's how would I start this? The bread. This is actually a good. I mean, for you, Daddy, because you've been to most of my classes. You know, I teach you a little bit of like some of the advanced stuff. You know, where you can use shapes here, but you can also use forms for this. Okay, because you know, if your goal is to really kind of visualize the depth, okay, of what you're drawing. But I'll show you basically start with the largest shape that's in the drawing, right, or that's in the photo. Okay, you know, don't start with the breads themselves, because they're actually pieces of part of a larger whole. The whole thing is actually the basket, so you start with that. You know, the basket is basically an oval, right? So you know that's the basic shape of the basket, is an oval. Now, the basket itself is actually a three-dimensional thing. It's got a depth and it's got, you know, a shape to it. So, you know, you can visualize that a few different ways. But I would say, you know, you have to kind of visualize that there's another circle towards the bottom, right, of the basket. It's smaller, right, because it's coming out like you know, like that. So, I would say it's probably down here based on the angle. It's hard because it's cut off a little bit, but here, I'll draw over top of the. Let me draw over top of it so I can show you what I'm talking about. Hey, move this out of the way. No. Do this. Come on. Move you out of the way. Oh, okay. All right. Now I'm gonna pick blue, and I'm going to go. Yeah, I'm on layer 3. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, since it's cropped, it's a little hard to see, but you know, you have. Okay, you got the basic oval shape right there. Okay, over the outside the basket. And of course, it's a wicker basket, so it's like the shape is a little deformed. It's not quite an oval, but you know, you start with an oval first. Then there's the bottom of the basket, which is somewhere down here. It's cut off, but I would say it's down here only because of the fact that you can see the bottom of the basket there.
Should it be around here? Because it looks like it's kind of shallow.
That's the thing. That's why I say it's a form. It's not just that. That's probably the midpoint of it. But the actual bottom of it is down here somewhere, because this is the bottom of the bowl or the basket, right? It's cut off, so you don't really see it, because you basically, like, even the edge is cut off right here. But you can see that that there's the bottom of the basket. It's like right, if I follow that curve, right, it's right about there. So that's where the bottom of the basket would be, and then everything else radiates out. Okay, so. In this case, this is what you would call a form. It's a three-dimensional form that, you know, would I think more closely represent kind of like almost like a trapezoid, a rounded trapezoid. You know, something like that. You know, like a traditional bowl, but it's not quite. You know, it's a little bit more shallow than a traditional bowl, so it's probably more like that. You know, but that's the actual bottom, and then. You know, if you draw circles in increasing, you know, dimensions, or excuse me, diameters, you'll eventually get to the size of the actual opening of the bowl. You know, at that point, then it's just a matter then of you know, there's a couple different techniques you can do as far as figuring out, how to measure. Okay, a lot of people have different, you know, ways of doing it. But you know, one way, or at least like the way that I've done with people before, is that once you break down a shape, everything else kind of follows whatever that the main shape is, and the main shape is that oval, right? That's right here at the lip of the basket. Okay. Once you have that, then it's a matter. This is a little bit more advanced, but it's a matter of then figuring out the middle point of that basket or that opening, right? So you would try to cut it in half. Okay, and then cut it in half to the best of your ability.
That weird thing, that perspective thing.
You can if you want. And again, this will be a little bit harder to do because you don't have as much information, because the photo's cut off. You don't have a whole lot of context about where where this basket is sitting, right? You don't know what table it's on. You don't know the orientation of the table. So it's harder for you to kind of figure out exactly where the vanishing point is or where the eye line is. Okay, so you just have to go. You kind of have to go by what you see versus how the photo is taken. So this is where I would say use whatever measurement tricks you want to use. You can use the aspect of, okay, find the biggest shape and then cut it into quarters, right? So you have quadrants 1, 2, 3, 4, and then you can use that as a reference to when you're actually drawing freehand. Okay, so if I have my bowl down here and I'm drawing freehand, let me try to shape this out a little bit more. Okay, bowl. All right, so again, I'm gonna drawing a freehand. There's my quadrants. 2, 3, 4. What's that?
That's a lot of depth.
A lot of what?
Depth.
Yeah. Well, yeah. The bread has depth, and there's a cloth underneath of it too. I haven't even gotten to that yet, but you figure out the quadrants so that way you know how to proportion the rest of your shapes around it, right? Because everything else is essentially a circle, but it's a circle with depth. Okay, and the depth will come later, and that will come with the details and how you draw the details. Okay, and it's actually good because the bread itself has these details that would give you the insight on the shape or the dome shape of the bread. So now that you have some quadrants to work with, when you draw your circles, so essentially that's what they are. They're just circles, right? The overlapping circles. All right. But now you know that middle one, is closer to, the middle of the bowl. And it overlaps that center line, right? And it's closer to the edge. So that's how you would get your proportions down. This one is close to the edge. It overlaps the one in the middle. It goes over the center line a bit, so it's about there. One in the back comes up, overlaps the middle center line, touches the middle, but overlaps that one. That one's about there, and then this one crosses over here, right, about so. Okay, so that's the bowl, and that's the basic shapes of the bread. So details would be, okay, here's where the cloth is. Now, like, here's the thing, like, you can go by what you see, but you can also use, just basic logic, right, over what's actually in the photo. So it's some sort of cloth or napkin, and napkins and cloths are usually square or rectangular. So that it has straight edges, okay, and you can see you can already see them right there. So there's edge, it curves. This is where another corner would be. another curve there, straight line up there. Okay, so it's basically a deformed, you know, rectangle. Some people call that a mesh. You know, if you were into like 3D stuff, you might say it's a mesh of some sort, you know, where it's a deformed, you know, rectangle or triangle or whatever, you know. So like rather than trying to say, oh, okay, I got to draw this line here to here, and then draw a line from here to over here, and then draw a line, you know. No, it's one piece, you know. It's one unit, you know. So think of it as such, you know, and don't be afraid to draw the whole thing and intersect lines and draw over top, and because you're just sketching. You're just sketching to kind of figure out the basic shapes and the proportions of things, you know. Not only that, but you don't want to like run into a problem where, you know, you might draw this line, you know, one way, and then you draw this over here and it doesn't connect, you know, like even though you don't see it, there's, you know, a cloth that goes underneath that piece of bread there, you know. So you want to make sure that, you know, you're accounting for that, you know, when you're drawing and sketching it out. So same thing down here in my freehand, you know, version. You know, I'm going to start with that top corner, but I know if I start with that top corner, I have to continue on, you know, because it's a square shape. So it comes around, comes around here, comes out over the bowl here, goes up, curves around. Like that, you know. And again, your sketch may not be exactly perfect, you know, and that's fine. But it's mainly so that you can get the basic gist of, you know, what you're trying to draw, you know. A lot of people will take a subject, whether it's, you know, still life like this, or whether it's a figure or what have you, and they'll take it and they'll draw it several times. I mean, I've known people, and I've done it myself, where, you know, I've been given homework where it's kind of like you spend 1 week drawing the same damn thing, you know, a million different ways. God. Okay, no, seriously, you know, and you think after like the 5th time you draw, it's like, again, there's nothing more to learn. But then after the 10th time, you're like, wait a minute, I didn't notice that before. I didn't notice this before, you know. And you find new ways of interpreting it, or you find new things that you didn't quite, you know, notice before. So yeah, when you draw things over and over again, multiple times, you know, it trains your eyes to kind of think more a little bit, or see a little bit more critically, you know, what you're looking at, and break it down. And you know, once you do that, you start drawing faster and faster and faster, especially when in the sketching stage. You know, you don't want to spend too much time in your sketching stage. It's mainly just to kind of get, you know, a feel for what it is you're trying to draw, what the basic shapes are. You know, you don't want to get too far into the weeds on details. You know, you just want it to be rough. You know, and then as you go through and detailing and coloring and stuff like that, that's when you get into more. Okay, here's what this is, and now I can fix this, and I can fudge this, and I can change this. Absolutely change it. You know, that's the whole point of being an artist, is being able to interpret what you see. You know, so it's fine. It's all fine and good to like draw it exactly, you know, but, you know, also allow for your own interpretation as well. Okay, so there we have the basic setup for the bread. Now, if I wanted to go in and keep going with this, how would you then draw that? How would you then continue on and make it look more realistic or three-dimensional, whatever? And that's where depth comes in. So, hang on, let me move some things around. Let me make another layer, and let me go over here, and let me take these lines and move them out of the way for a minute, so we can see what we're doing. All right, let's move those over there. Okay, so my freehand one is not too far off. It's maybe slightly skewed, but it's close enough. All right, but the idea now is, if I take this and I lighten it up a little bit, go back to layer 4, over here. All right, let me see what I got. 4. Okay. So now, if I wanted to go in here and you know, really get more, you know, get some more details in there, one of the things that I would want to do is you know, highlight the depth of the form of the bread. Okay, now the bread already has lines in it, okay, but the lines are not perfectly straight. So that gives you that's the first thing to give you the indication that, it's not a flat piece of bread, right? All right. So, from there, so probably the straightest lines are the ones that are dead on. All right. So like if I'm going at this first piece of bread here, okay, it's got, a line dead on, but it's slightly curved. And this one's even more curved. Actually, it's two lines, right? If you look at it critically. And there's a line here, but they're all curves. Okay, the curves denote that there's a overall shape, okay, or form that the bread is taking. And that's what you want to make sure you capture. And again, it's hard to, some people are really good at this, where they can capture the form of something just with their line art. Okay, that takes a lot of practice to do that. But ultimately, if you were going to recreate this, it would be a painting of some sort, or it'd be a colored drawing of some sort, where you can use color as well, color, light, and shade, to denote the depth of a thing. But ultimately, just if you make sure that you're putting in the correct orientation of these lines, you're kind of giving that impression of, okay, there's these details or whatever there. But that's what's going to give that circle and make it look more like, oh, it's not just a circle, it's a dome, right? I'm trying to do this quick, so so that's the first thing, is that yes, there's lines on them, but they're not straight. So make sure that you're really showing the curve in those lines, because that's really going to give. So ultimately, drawing is an illusionary practice, right? It's an illusion. You're taking a three-dimensional thing, or a two-dimensional representation of a three-dimensional thing, right, which is the photograph, and then interpreting that back into more two-dimensional lines and still making it look three-dimensional. So, obviously you can't draw in 3 dimensions. So, what you're doing is an illusion. It's an approximation of, what you're seeing. Now, I don't know if you've done any baking or anything like that, but no, seriously, some people bake and some people, so like when you do, don't be afraid to use a knowledge of one thing to help you with your artwork, because it's a logical thing to do. Okay, if you already know, let's say if you already bake and you already make this bread, you know very well how those lines are made, right? So you know very well what the proportions of those lines are. Some people, like when they make peanut butter cookies or whatever, they make the lines with a fork. Okay, and the fork has very proportional lines to it. The tongue, the what do you call them, tangs, I guess, of the fork, are evenly spaced out. So when you're drawing, you want to make sure that you're drawing, even though you may not see it, it's there, that there's evenly spaced lines there from where the fork was being pushed into the bread or into the cookies or whatever, So stuff like that use that somewhat, I guess it's somewhat common sense in a way, that sometimes you gets thrown out of the window because you're drawing, so you don't think to engage that part of your brain. Same thing if you were drawing a car, or if you're drawing, something that is machined. You know very well in real life that's a perfect circle, or this is, that wheel is a perfect circle. So if you're not drawing a perfect circle, you already know something's wrong. If you're trying to just draw the lines as you see them, that may not be the best way of doing it, because logically that's supposed to be a circle, or it's supposed to be an oval, or it's supposed to be a square. So make sure that you're also thinking about real life. When you're drawing something from reference. Because that's really going to help you as far as, when you're looking at it critically and going, does this look correct, or does this look right? You can answer that yourself just by going, well, does a neck really move that way? Does an arm really move that way? Does a wheel look like that? No, it doesn't. It should look like this, and then you can kind of correct your mistakes. And most of them are just proportional things. You're making this too big or you're making this too small. Um, so yeah, that's the major thing that I would look at here is really kind of, you know, checking the lines and making sure that, you know, you're not making things too flat, I guess, you know. And again, a lot of it depends on your style, and I'm not going to like go into like styles and stuff like that, but, you know, just in terms of how to read the reference and how to sketch it out so that you can then go on and paint it or something like that, just for the sake of that. That's really what you want to make sure that you're, you know, seeing, is that, you know, these are forms. They have depth. They react to light. You know, they have, you know, then there's different ways of showing that too, depending on what it is that you're drawing. You know, in some cases you might, something that looks fluffy is different from something that looks like it's hard, you know, and dense. But that's how I would do it. Some people might actually sit there, you know, like, you know, if you're more a 3D artist and you use like a lot of 3D programs, you might actually go in and say, no, I'm going to realize these as full on, you know, these are domes, and I'm going to show all the lines, and I'm going to show the entire mesh of the dome, you know, so I make sure that I, you know, see, you know, all, you know, how, you know, so you can draw all the circles and you can draw all the grid lines and stuff like that, so that you are aware of, you know, the topography, you know, of, you know, the form itself. You know, this is a dome, you know. So it depends on how much information you need for your sketch, you know, while you're going through. Because again, think of your sketch as being a map, you know. It's just it's taking notes, essentially. You know, you're trying to notate where things are, how big things are, how they relate to other shapes, or how big this is in relation to this other form or this other shape, you know, before you start adding details and before you start, you know, painting or whatever, you know. So, you know, your sketch can be as messy or as complex as you need it to be. I would say, though, just from experience, my sketches have been way overworked. I'm doing really hard, you know, lately, to make sure that my sketches are, you know, light and don't have too much detail, because I don't want to overwork the sketch to the point where it's kind of like there's nothing left to add, which I've seen people do. You know, they haven't even, you know, gotten to the inking part yet, but they have so much detail in their sketch that you can't really ink it without losing information, you know. So again, your sketch is more like note-taking, general shapes, general proportions and stuff like that, and then you can kind of, over top of that, you can start adding your details and stuff like that. And it's good, because then you don't have to worry about, is this in proportion, is this the right size, is this the right shape, is this in the right place, you know. You can kind of see it, you know, ahead of time. Okay, does that help with the bread? Do I need to do a little bit more? Do you understand where I'm going with that?
I understand.
Good. All right. Can you show me how to draw this? Okay, yes. Let me bring that in. Wait, let me grab the... Sure. Here, move this over here. Go back to 3. Bring that up. Get rid of this because we don't need it. Paste from file. Okay. There's another request here. All right. First thing I'm gonna say about doing silhouettes like this is don't get intimidated by the silhouette. The silhouette is actually your friend. Because there's a lot of, you know, if anything, you're not, you know, being intimidated by a lot of detail. So it in of itself is a shape, okay? But don't look at it as one shape. That's a, again, that's a thing that you will get overwhelmed. So if you try to draw this as one shape, forget it. I don't try to do that. You want to still break it down into the basic shapes, basic body shapes. Let me see. Let me get my orange pen. Actually, I probably want a yellow one or something bright. Okay. Let's see. Wait, where did I put that? Oh, I put it on 3. All right. So, all right. So based on this, torso is about there. Based on where I see the butt, the hips are about there. So there's your first two, center mass and the hips. Probably the two most important things. Everything else is an appendage. So you've got that. You know that the neck is right there, and you know that the head is here. Okay, so you got that. All right, and based on that, okay, you can again, this is where a little bit of anatomy comes in, but not a whole lot. Just again, this is the basics. Where your shoulders are, where your legs go into the hips. The hip points and the shoulder points. So I can see that there's an elbow right there. So I know that there's my arm, there's my hands. I can see that there's a knee about there. Wait, no, that's not quite right. Hang on. Knee is right there. Which means that's the leg. Here's the calf. Here's the feet. That. Everyone has their own ways of blocking out the body shapes. I try to do stickman first, just so I know the direction and the line of action for for the various body parts. You want to make sure you get a hang of those. Line of action mainly like where the curves are and stuff like that. So it depends. It depends on how you draw your figures and stuff like that. Some people they focus more on gestural things, so they instead of representing everything as a stick man, it might be more like, let me switch to another brush here. It might be more gestural where this leg is represented as a sweeping line, this one's a sweeping line, this is just a line or a curve or a line, and that's where the head is and there, and then you have your so now they have the basic lines of action, or they have the basic lines of what do you want to say? The some people call them mass lines, I guess, where the most of the action is, and then from there you draw on top of those lines. It's totally up to you how you want to do that. If you're a gestural person, or if you're more of a structural person. I'm more of a structural person. I try to do more, make sure that I get the structure of things down. I'm trying to be a more gestural person because that loosens you up a little bit more. You don't draw so tightly. So if you're a tight drawer, sometimes doing gestural studies is a little bit would help, loosen you up a little bit. But then again, if you don't, if you have trouble with like proportions and stuff like that, you might want to be more structural. But yeah, that would be the basics, as far as like, okay, where's the main points, everything else is just basically again details of the body and context, right? So, and because everything's in shadow, you've already got everything's already has like a defined shape to it, like the swings are there. Again, this is where some of that common sense comes in. Obviously she's on a swing, so this part right here is the bottom of the swing. Her butt is probably not that big, it's just there's the bottom of the swing is there. So You know, even though you don't see it, you got to think about it. You know, you got to say, oh, you know what? That's why that shape is like that. You know, so I have to kind of take that into account. Let's see. And this is probably on the outside. Yeah, and that's on the other side, right? Because you know how a swing works, right? So you know that the ropes are usually on the outside. You know, so again, drawing over the top of the reference, I'm all for it. Some people say it's cheating, it's tracing, it's whatever. It's not. You're just learning. You're just studying. You know, for the purpose of studying, for the purpose of learning, do it. If anything, it's going to train your eye to read the shapes faster, to be able to break things down, so that you're not so overwhelmed when you actually draw it freehand. And again, you get a little bit of that muscle memory in there, so that when you actually do go to, you know, draw it, you know, without a net, so to speak, you know, at least you have a little bit of, you know, memory to call up on, you know. So I know that you know, the torso is not quite completely horizontal. It's more like that. You know, the butt and the hips are down there, maybe a little bit more forward, like that. And
you know what?
hmm.
One of my friends in Alaska recently got me a book that's called Drawing Anatomy with Force, and I've been reading that for the last couple of days. It's
Hmm.
basically teaching the same thing that
Yeah.
you teach.
Yeah, absolutely. I've read that book. It's a good book.
But she gave me the PDF file because it came with it, and she didn't want it, and she knew I was doing the same studies.
Yep. Yeah, drawing the body with force, that's very much like gestural stuff. You know, like seeing the line of action and seeing the, you know, where all the movement is. You know, actually, I think that's one of the books that taught me the plumb line. You know, where you draw the line from the chin to the feet to see where the center of gravity is. I think that's one of the few books that actually still teaches that. Yeah, obviously, it's only for, you know, poses where a person's actually standing, but you know, so like, okay, so right here I can see that, you know, one of my legs is too short, okay, because already I can see that I'm measuring the distance here, right? You know, when I'm actually, like, you know, figuring this out and going, well, that's not quite right, you know, so I gotta make sure, I gotta bring it in a little, you know, bring it up here, you know.
Kind of like perspective in a way.
Yeah, this is kind of like perspective, but I'm taking it. I'm not like going into perspective just yet because it's a little bit more advanced, and not a whole lot of people like understand perspective at first because, you know, there is a bit of, what do you call it? How people perceive depth. You know, is very different from person to person, but almost everyone can see shapes. You know.
Yeah.
So, you know, I try to go down to like the base. Everyone can see shapes and lines, you know. So let's just start from there. Flatten everything out. What does it look like? How do you recreate it? Kind of a thing. Once you get used to seeing the shapes, then it starts dawning on people in some, you know, in different ways of how to say, oh, that's rounded, that's a square, that's solid, that's a cube, you know. It's not just a square, or it's not just three squares, it's actually a cube, right? So once the person starts expanding their you know, impressions of things and how they see things, then it becomes easier for them to see, you know, the forms in things. So instead of lines and instead of, you know, these ovals or whatever, you know, they might get more into cylinders. Okay. Now, for something like this, where you can't see the actual form of the person, like it's in silhouette, that's when you kind of have to start using a little bit of your mental gymnastics as far as, like, you know, interpolating that stuff. Okay, and that's again, that's kind of like where you start building off of or pulling from your real life experiences and going, okay, I know for like when I'm on a swing and from that angle, then that this cylinder will be something like this, you know, and then this cylinder will be more like, you know, this, and then this leg is actually like this, you know, and this leg is, you know, and then you start building the forms of things, you know. But that's when you start, that's when you have that, you know, well, one, confidence, you know, confidence and knowledge that, you know, you can see the forms, or that, you know, you have a grasp over, you know, one, your perspective, and then how you draw those forms in perspective. Perspective is hard. It's not easy. And it's especially, but it's easy to learn if you study from photographs, okay, from real life photographs. You know, it becomes easier for you to kind of see that and to kind of interpret it. I think the you know, some people go from like zero to, you know, urban sketching, you know, and their perspective is all over the place because they don't know how to look at the scene, or you know, measure things with their eye or whatever just yet. So everything's all kind of wonky or whatever, and there's no depth. But after a while, they get used to it. But you know, you don't need to jump that far. You know, some people, it's like, well, hang on, learn your shapes first. Learn your shapes, learn your proportion, you know, and figure out your shapes and then your forms, and then you can get into like more drawing, your urban sketching, where you have like these crazy, you know, 270-degree scenes or whatever that you're trying to draw, you know, in proportion, you know. You know, but yeah, you start small. Start small. Start with the shapes, and then you go, wait a minute, there's forms here. You know, especially when you start learning light and shade, that's when you get into forms. You know, that's when you start saying, okay, wait a minute, the light's over on this side, the shadow's over on this side. It's got a defined, you know, shape to it. You know, that's not just a flat surface. You know, and then once you get into forms, then you realize, oh, these forms have texture. Right? So whether something is furry, or whether something is stone, or whether something is, you know, granite or something like that. You know. Let's see. Yeah, but it's all about lines, shapes, curves, you know, figuring that stuff out, and then eventually getting into your forms, your three-dimensional forms. But yeah, don't, you know, draw from real life, draw from from photographs, you know, and basically just break them. You know, don't get overwhelmed by the details, because they're just details. You know, when you actually break things down, it's still the same shapes: circles, ovals, triangles, squares. You know, we haven't come up with anything new yet. Okay, as far as like as far as shapes are concerned, you know.
Trying to do with my college project I'm currently working on, because I'm doing a swan, and I gotta actually make the swan look perfect because she's a perfectionist.
Who, your
And I've been doing
teacher
the
is a
same thing for
perfectionist?
years. Yeah,
Okay.
and yeah. So I had to do the same thing that you taught, and the books I've read taught, like perspective and the shapes, and then doing them in a 3D form because I got to do it in pencil shading.
Yeah.
And I think it's looking okay. She's
Okay.
there and doing pretty good. But yeah, the lessons are really paying off.
Good. Good. Is she teaching you the forms? Did you just jump right to forms?
Yeah.
Okay.
She
Yeah.
is.
Some people have trouble with forms because like I know like even in grade school and stuff like that, you know, there's certain spatial relationships that people have trouble with. Some people just are naturally good at them, and other people are not. You know, I don't know if you've ever taken those tests where it's kind of like, okay, here's a shape. What does it look like when it's turned 90 degrees? And most people can't do that. You know,
Because I'm currently at a college class
right?
for advanced art.
Oh, okay. You know, so you know, I know a lot of people struggle with forms because they still can't spatially conceptualized them yet, you know. So it's hard. It might be hard for someone to say, okay, now here's the form of the body, and this is what it's going to look like when it's turned around, and they're lost, you know. They're like, what? I don't know what you're talking about, you know. Or like when you're given a pose, and they say, okay, here's a pose. Draw it if they're facing this way, or draw it if they're rotated 90 degrees, and most people can't do that because they can't see it spatially, you know. You know, so yeah, it's tough sometimes, like jumping right to forms. Shapes are easier, but you know, once you get the handle of shapes, then forms almost become second nature because you almost evolve into them. Yeah.